What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our Week 14 sit start. I know it's normally Kian doing these videos, but today I decided to step in and see how these ones are. So I've got a couple of sits and I've got a couple of starts for you guys today for your fantasy football Week 14. Playoffs should be starting either this week or maybe it started last week, but these are pretty important tips for you guys to remember, and if you have these players, either put them in or take them out. I'm going to start out with our starts for this week. I've got two running backs and two wide receivers. David Montgomery. They're playing against the Houston Texans. Obviously, the quarterback situation in Chicago is very strange, to say the least. I don't think it's great. Trubisky, Foles, they've rotated, I think, 3 times at this point. So Montgomery, I think we saw it last week. He's going to start to see much more production. I know he was hurt for a little while. He wasn't really the same after the couple weeks after he was injured. But with the quarterback play how it is, I think Montgomery is a solid start for this week, especially against a Texans defense that the Texans are 26th ranked run defense. So I think that he will be a good addition for this week. He played really well last week against the Lions, and he's got reception upside too. So if you're in a PPR league especially, make sure to get him into your lineup. Got Todd Gurley. He plays against the Chargers this week. He's had some not so great matchups recently. I think he should have a huge bounce back week this week. He obviously has not been great recently, but the Chargers just got shut out against the Patriots, who have had a pretty weak offense all season. He had 23 attempts, which is on the high end for attempts-wise. He can be productive receiving-wise. I don't know how big his production will be, but it's definitely a possibility that he gets a couple receptions this week. He's just the featured back for the Falcons. He's the only one that gets carries, receptions, anything. I think he's just the main guy for the Falcons in the run game. So he's definitely a player start, especially against that Chargers defense that has struggled recently. I know it's really tough for them, but they have definitely struggled, and Gurley is a good matchup this week. I think he's definitely a start for this week. Tyler Lockett. I know Tyler Lockett's so inconsistent this year, but they're playing the Jets this week.
Good.
Honestly, a decent strategy for fantasy football this year was to just camp the waiver wire and pick up every single player that plays against the Jets. There is not much that could go wrong here. Obviously, he could have one of his off games. I just don't think it'll come against the Jets. Wilson will have a much more consistent, less interceptions, hopefully this week. DK has been the focus the past couple weeks. I think Wilson should be throwing the ball to DK way more because he's so good, but Lockett, with the focus on DK, Lockett could have a really, really big game. We've seen how explosive Lockett can be when he has big games. So this could, again, be a 30-plus point game for Lockett. I think it's just a good week for him. Obviously, I don't think he's worth that wide receiver 1 spot just because he is so volatile. He can do well, he can do poorly. But a wide receiver 2, I think he could be potentially a top 10 receiver this week. Then again, he could drop to not much. But I think he's definitely a start, possibly the worst secondary in the league. Lockett's definitely a go for me here. It's just too risky to bench him because he plays so well. I've got Amari Cooper playing against another pretty weak team, the Cincinnati Bengals. Having Dalton back, that's really good for him. With Ben DiNucci or Garrett Gilbert at quarterback, his production's going to go way, way, way down. I think that with Dalton back, of course, his production will go up. His CeeDee Lamb's, possibly Michael Gallup, but he is that number 1 receiver in that stacked core. So they can't just double him up because then that leaves other guys open. So they have to try to play possibly some man coverage on him, which you never want to do against one of the top receivers in the league. He's a deep threat receiver. He can rack up the yards after the catch. It's a poor defense. This Bengals defense has not been very good this year. Bengals backup QB is in. I think, did Brandon Allen get hurt last week? Could be Brandon Allen, but it's not Joe Burrow, that's for sure. So the Cowboys could be seeing a lot of the ball, which means they could be running it a lot. But when they don't, Amari Cooper will be the guy they're looking for. I'm looking at over 100 yards, probably 7-8 catches too. So it's a good fantasy showing for him, probably a touchdown. I think for sure you've got to start Amari Cooper this week. Moving on to my sits for this week. I've got, first up, Jarvis Landry. I think that although Jarvis Landry, his production's been looking good the past few weeks, I don't know that this is the week to play him because he's playing the Ravens, who have, as we know, a fairly solid secondary, to say the least. Marlon Humphrey, great corner. They've got good safeties in Chuck Clark. It's just a good defense all around, and especially without Odell, all the focus is going to be on Landry. I know Mayfield had a really, really explosive week last week, throwing touchdown receptions left and right to many different receivers that you wouldn't expect to get these touchdown catches. But Landry, although he's been the focus the past couple weeks with 8 catches in each of the last 2 weeks and 2 touchdowns, 1 in each, I think that, again, this is just not his week. They're playing a good defense. Mayfield's been spreading the ball out. I just don't see Landry getting you over 5 catches for 60 plus yards. So just not a huge week for Landry. Brandon Cooks. Cooks is playing against the Bears this week, who have a pretty solid defense. I think they were much better last year, but obviously with their offensive struggles this year, they've needed to rely a bit more heavily on their defense, and it hasn't been great just because they have not been able to keep up scoring-wise, but this defense is fine. However, Brandon Cooks only has 4.6 receptions per game since their bye week, which is 5 weeks ago, and it's just not great. 4.6 catches. He hasn't had a touchdown in the last 4 weeks. Even without Will Fuller last week, he just did not do anything. It's just, Fuller's out. The attention is all on Brandon Cooks. There's just going to be no space for him. Deshaun Watson may have a huge game running the ball, and then maybe they have a good running game. I do think the Texans will win, but Brandon Cooks, not a big game from him. Miles Sanders, now this part's not as surprising. Playing against the Saints, now I kind of understand why I have him in the sick column. The Saints defense has been really, really good this season. I think that it's going to be really hard for Sanders to get the ball moving. Although with Jalen Hurts as the quarterback, I think that gives him a lot of potential for good amount of carries. Obviously last week they only gave him the ball 10 times, which is really surprising. I think that with a guy as explosive as Miles Sanders, you've got to be giving the ball more than that. But with a bit of a dual backfield with him and Boston Scott, I don't see him getting too many carries this week, even with Jalen Hurts. I think the Saints' run defense is too good for them to be able to run the ball effectively. Sanders also only has 3 touchdowns this season on the ground, and that's just not nearly efficient enough for him to be a solid fantasy starter for this week, especially against the Saints. I don't know how many times I'm going to have to say that, but Sanders, although he could have a good week, just because Jalen Hurts is in and the receiving core is not great, I don't see it happening because of that dominant Saints defense. Moving on to our final sit for this week, I've got, against the Colts, Derek Carr, the Vegas Raiders quarterback. I think that Carr, although he's had, honestly, a pretty quiet but pretty good season, over 3,000 yards, 22 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Obviously, he threw that game-winning touchdown to Henry Ruggs deep in the end zone against the Jets last week. I don't even have much to say about that. The Jets are just terrible. I don't even know if they were trying to let him score, but it happened. Carr has had a good season. He's thrown an INT in each of the last 3 games, which is not great, but his touchdown numbers are fine. 3 touchdowns last week, 3 touchdowns against the Chiefs. However, the Colts defense are one of the best units in the league, and I think the Colts defense alone is enough to put any all-right quarterback, make him look like a not-so-great quarterback. Obviously, they can't do it to guys like Patrick Mahomes or Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Guys like that are going to be almost as effective. Obviously, they'll slow him down a little bit. But guys like Derek Carr, who just don't have the dominant receiving threats, just the dominant threat in himself. I just don't see Carr having a big outing this week. This Colts defense is just too strong. It's possible, just without receiving threats. Jacobs has been fine. I just don't see Carr going great.